glitch, and then they're live, so you could, if you can't make it, you could look on YouTube or Google Plus and watch live. And if you let me know, give me a heads up via email, I can also respond to questions. I think there's a little chat board in there while we're having class. And then afterwards, a couple hours after class, you can go to YouTube and find the class, so you can replay any part or just use the guided meditation part for your own purposes if you want to. Okay, hopefully I'll have a CD or a downloadable recording that's just meditation after I get the technology worked out for me. Let's see, what was the other piece? So those who are new, if you want to just see me after class and let me know if you got what you needed or what you were hoping to get. Any experience at all?
Me?
Yeah, meditation?
Nothing formal.
Nothing? Okay. All right.
Or self.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
So.
And I forget, do you have experience?
Not anything formal.
Okay. All right. So I want to encourage everyone who's been here before also, it's also a good idea, but especially for you guys to kind of suspend whatever ideas that you have about meditation. I think that'll create the best experience for you this evening, especially during the meditation itself. Because our ideas can really get in the way and prevent us from having an experience that's helpful. I like to not think of it so much as, it's either good or bad, what happens on the cushion, or we did well or didn't do well. It's really just more, were we doing things that were helpful to ourselves on the cushion, or were we in opposition to ourselves, or in opposition to whatever was happening on the cushion. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean with that. Okay. So I usually have a little topic or something that's come up during the week, as life always provides plenty of material. And I put a little post on Facebook. I'm behind with blog posts on the blog right now, but I wrote a little note on Facebook where you can also go to check to make sure when we're meeting. We're not meeting next Monday, by the way, for the holiday. Over the weekend, my husband and I were at this little fast foodie place, healthy food type place, and it was at normal dinner time, so we didn't have a lot of choices of places to sit. And we were near this group of people that were kind of young, and I picked up on right away, being a counselor, you hear clinical speak, like my ears perked up. And they seemed like they work in some kind of a residential setting, and they were discussing a client or clients, and one particular client, and I kept hearing this word they were using, like, she's doing this and doing that, and other non-spiritual activities. And that really always gets my attention when people use that kind of language, spiritual or non-spiritual, because that really denotes a concept. That means the people in that group had a shared understanding of the division between one set of activities that is spiritual and another set of activities that's not non-spiritual. And I wrote in the little Facebook commentary that, like, it amuses me, but it also makes me sad, because that person is clearly going to be judged and punished in some way, from what I could tell. And it's unfortunate that some people take concepts like spirituality and use them as a ruler to judge what's right and wrong, or good and bad. And I said, what came to me was, that calling some activities non-spiritual, if we're really dealing in reality, what really is is like saying that some human activities are non-human because they're all human activity has a human component, and all activity, no matter what we are doing, there is a spiritual aspect to it. That is part of our journey. There is nothing that we're doing, even if we're cursing somebody out on the highway because they cut us off. There's still something happening there, and it's related to our spirituality. But what could be happening is that we are less aligned with our true self, our true purpose, our what we really know to be true, or other times we're more aligned. So I like to think about our activities as either more helpful or less helpful, more aligned or less aligned with who we really are.
What would your definition of spirituality be? I don't really have one.
That's my point exactly.
Oh, okay.
The term, I mean, so we always get stuck because all words are just pointers, and we all have to have an agreed understanding about what we're pointing at in order for the word to even have any meaning. So some of us have ideas that, and certainly when we start out, we're using this word spirituality to talk about ideas relating to the truth of our being. So all this talk, it doesn't matter what teacher you're reading, Adi Shanti or Pema Chodron or Chogyam Trungpa, it doesn't really matter who, old or modern, but we're not talking about religion. We're not talking about Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or any sort of defined set of rules about how to be spiritual. We're really just talking about this aspect of ourselves that is our spiritual being.
And it's different for different people.
Well, no, I think spirituality is the aspect it's experienced differently. What if we say that?
All right.
So it's experienced differently, it's defined differently, it's approached differently by different people, but our spirituality just is. It's almost irrelevant to sit around and talk about it because it's not like it wasn't there before and now because we're aware of it and talking about it and interested in it that suddenly there's something new there. It's always been there. It's just some part of ourselves that, just like our body, has always been there. But it's an aspect of ourselves that's involved in this path, this journey. So we've got a physical way of being and we've got a spiritual way of being, but they're not really inseparable. We can't actually pull them apart and say they're totally separate things. We can talk about, it gets very tricky when we get into concepts because we're using words to talk about things that we can't really draw a picture of.
And I want to see if I'm on the same page as you.
Right. So luckily we have lots of different teachers and lots of different ways of talking about this spirituality thing. But I think it's helpful, it's useful to get less caught up in what is spirituality and ask a more important question, which is, what is me or I? Who am I? What am I? What am I is actually a more clear pointer than the who am I. If we sit around all day contemplating who am I, which is one of the questions they give the Zen students, then we might get really stuck in thinking there's a somebody there. And we have to find them and beat our head against the wall for years and years and years and years. And maybe come up with, I'm nobody. Right? And then the Zen teacher comes along and says, who did that hurt? Who felt that? Because the answer is that we're both. We have this spiritual part, this absolute unlimited, I can't show it to you, draw you a picture part. We all have that. And then we also all have this physical, hard, right? The thing that we can see, right? That touches and tastes and smells. And so the answer is not one thing. We can look and look and look, and we can find this one thing. And even when we do the direct pointing, if we find, the aha, it wasn't personal. It's just this unfolding. There's just life happening here. I can't actually find an owner of it. If I look inside, I can't find the owner. I can't find an actual construct that makes the experience I'm having right now mine, to label it mine. I just know, because my eyes are looking out of here, that this experience seems to be happening around this central location that is a body that people know by this name, Cynthia, right? But I can't say that I have proof of me or mine or I. They're constructs. Those are concepts. And even after we discover there's no such thing as I or me or mine, we're left with, okay, so who hurts then, right? I got a body, and I wake up every morning, and now what? Now, how shall I live? So we always are balancing. We've got this relative aspect, the right here, right now, pinch me, I can feel it. And then this spiritual part, this unnameable, spacious, undescribable, limitless part of ourselves. They're both there at the same time. Right? But we're conditioned to always want to say it's either or. Finite answers, that's what we want, right? We want to know. The brain is like a pattern-seeking machine. That's our survival mechanism, our survival system, and it wants an answer. It wants to know this or that. It doesn't want to hear this and that. So it can be a little bit of a barrier sometimes. People, when I talk about things like letting go of concepts, people want to know, well, how can that possibly be true? How can I possibly let go of, or how can the things I think are bad, like pollution and war and crime, how can those things not be bad? So if we look, we find that everything can be one side of the coin. There are two sides, the good and the bad, the things we call good and bad, are two sides of the same coin. And none of those things can exist without the other. And so how do we deal with that? Instead of just preferring the good all the time, how do we cope with the fact that life seems to be composed of both sides of the coin all the time? We don't get to choose. There's a lot of yucky stuff. So if we prefer one set of facts or factual information to another set of facts, then we're always missing part of the picture. We're always going to be not quite satisfied, not quite feeling happy, because we've only got half the truth. We can't rest in only half of the truth. There's stuff missing there. How many of you have ever thought you knew something for sure, and then the very next day or the next hour or the next minute you got information that let you know it wasn't true anymore, and then it's totally irrelevant? And that's happened to all of us. So if we acknowledge that pretty much all of the things that we hold as true. I saw another one on Dr. Oz today, just saw a snippet of it. I think it was just a preview of an upcoming show about calcium. They kept upping and upping and upping the calcium daily recommendations, and now they think it's causing people all kinds of problems. Way too high because it needs all these other things. It needs magnesium, it needs D, it needs all this other stuff. So it happens all the time. It happens constantly in the world of health and medicine. Things we thought were true turn out not to be true. Things we thought were bad, not so bad, good, not so good, or even dangerous. It's everywhere. We can see evidence of this, that it's dangerous to hold on to our ideas of right and wrong. We can see that everywhere. But the mind wants to argue. And I've got a little story in here. I wanted to read a section from this book. This is one of Adyashanti's most recent books, Falling into Grace. He has another book about the Jesus story, and it's a lot of, I think, research and his fascination with Christ as a historical or a central saintly sort of figure, and how different from some other figures like the Buddha, Jesus is portrayed as having this human side, not really above it all. He kind of stays at the level of mortals, and he's accessible that way. And I hear it's a pretty good book. I haven't read that one yet.
Just started.
This one? Okay. So this story is, you'll see how it's related in a second. This little section is called Letting Go of Our Resistance to What Is There. Several years ago, I met a gentleman who told me about a painful emotion he was experiencing. I asked him to speak to me from the emotion, to tell me how the emotion felt about him, about the world, and about others. He looked inside and he said, "You know, Adya, I can't find any story." I said, "There is one." He said, "I really can't find it." So I encouraged him to just be with the emotion over the next week or two and to come back and share his experience with me. A few weeks later, we talked about his suffering. He told me that he had sat with it for about a week, looking carefully for any story that might be there. At first, he was unable to find anything. He then realized the reason that I couldn't hear the story of my suffering, that I couldn't hear the viewpoint of my suffering, was because I was keeping myself apart from it. I was merely the witness of it. Which, that's a trap. That's a thing that sometimes happens when people are earnestly practicing mindfulness and they get this wonderful, comfortable distance from, you step back, they call it the backward step, and you can see everything. But you're not meant to stay there. There's a point, there's a place in the journey for being backed up and seeing it all happening, and so we can go, oh, that's what's going on. But then sooner or later, we got to rejoin the story and participate and feel and be really one with what's happening. So Aji said, yes, you have to relinquish the witnessing of it to experience it fully. What he was able to see was that once he had relinquished the watching of it, the story began to come out, and he just let it flow. Through that process, he saw that it was this combination of feeling and thought that had locked the story in his system. And when he could finally let both out, including the intellectual or thought-based part of the story, the emotion lifted all by itself. Another time I met a man in Hawaii who had acquired polio when he was a very young child. He had a condition where certain symptoms of the polio reemerged later in adulthood. He literally wore a cage-like support on his neck and shoulders to hold his head in place because there was so much pain in his neck, shoulders, and back. He really couldn't function without having his head held up, and he required a massive amount of painkillers just to get through the day. He told me that one day when he was in a bookstore, he was reading a book in which he came across the following line: "It's not necessary to resist pain." And he said somehow those words hit him so deeply that he dropped the book where he was standing and kneeled on the floor. He was so stunned that he just remained there unmoving for about 15 minutes. He shared with me that this thought, just this idea that it wasn't necessary to struggle against his pain, was so unusual and so powerful that it brought him to his knees. Like most human beings, it seemed entirely logical to him to struggle against his pain. I'm not talking about emotional pain here, but physical pain, the raw pain that many people live with on a daily basis. While we may be able to free ourselves from suffering, pain is something that is very much a part of human life. No matter how free we become, we'll still be susceptible to pain, to raw physical pain from time to time. We can't escape pain, but what we can do is change our relationship with it. What this gentleman told me was that once he got up from the floor of the bookstore, once he recovered from being struck with awe at this one little sentence, he went back home, and over the next few days he noticed he had much, much less pain, about 50% less than the previous day. He went back to his doctor and asked to cut down his pain medication. His doctor suggested that this might not be a wise thing to do, so the man left. He came back a week later and said, "No, I'm ready to cut down the pain medication. I really am." Once again, the doctor said, "No, I think we should keep it where it is." Finally, he asked the doctor, "Why is it that you don't want me to reduce the pain medicine? I'm telling you I'm not experiencing the same amount of pain." And the doctor asked him, "Are you thinking of killing yourself?" The man said, "My gosh, no, that's the farthest idea from my mind. I've simply realized that I don't have to struggle against my pain, and this realization has shifted my experience dramatically." The doctor explained, "Well, sometimes when people who experience a lot of pain say they want to go off their pain medicine, it's because they made a decision to end their life, and there's a feeling of temporary freedom as a result of this decision. I was afraid that this might be the reason you wanted to lessen your medication." And the man explained to the doctor this was definitely not the case. He shared his realization that he no longer needed to struggle against the pain, and how, due to the realization, most of the pain had disappeared. Previously, the way his mind had been struggling with the sensation of pain had made his pain much worse. And then he talks about a similar, like a pain experience of his own, Avya does. But he says he noticed through the experience he was in great physical pain, but he wasn't suffering. It was clear to me that suffering and pain are in fact two different things. Suffering is derived from our resistance to what is. This is what causes us psychological or emotional suffering. Pain is an inevitable consequence of life. Sometimes we'll experience things that are quite painful. There are some people who live with chronic pain for their entire lives. Having talked to some people who experience chronic pain and who have done some deep introspection, I discovered that the people who deal with pain the best do not believe anything they think about their pain. They do not believe the thoughts they have about the future, and they do not indulge in the mind in trying to rationalize the pain. What they've all told me is that the more involved they allow their minds to be, the more frightened they become and more intensify the pain. So that leads to this next section where he talks about, and I'm going to bore you just a little bit longer, where he talks about dropping our conclusions about the past. When we look directly at that which sustains our suffering, the ideas and conclusions in the mind, it can be quite difficult to let it all go. Because in many cases, these conclusions appear to be quite reasonable and justified. In fact, it would almost be an insult to suggest they aren't real. I was speaking with a woman who told me a story about her childhood, and she said, "My mother should have been more kind to me." I asked her, "Is that really true?" She looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "Of course it's really true. Parents should treat their children kindly. Everybody knows that." I said, "I know that's what we conclude, but is it really true? Is it true that parents should treat their children kindly?" I could see by the look on her face that she couldn't imagine why I was asking this question, because to her it was so obvious. Then I said, "I understand that to treat children kindly is true for you. It's what you value. But obviously it wasn't your parents' truth, because that's not what they did. When we argue with what was, the only person who is going to suffer is us. It doesn't matter why we're arguing. It doesn't matter how justified our resistance is. When we begin to look deeply at what our mind is doing, we'll see that our conclusions and justifications for our own suffering are what allow the suffering to continue. It took me a while to work with this particular woman, and I had to invite her to really see that when she tells herself the story, parents should treat their children kindly, her body got tighter and more tense, and she felt deeper emotional hurt and even trauma in her heart. My next step was I invited her to have a memory of her parents, but without coming to any conclusions. I could see her thinking and returning to the past as she had a memory of some of the things that caused her so much pain. I asked, "What does it feel like when you don't tell yourself anything about the way your parents should have been?" She said, "Well, it's tolerable. In fact, it feels much better." But then very quickly she said, "But it's true. Parents shouldn't treat their children unkindly." I said, "Do you really know? Do you actually know that that's really true? We think it's true. We believe it's true. It might be a sacred value for you. But when we impose our present values on the past, we're bound to suffer. The truth is that your parents didn't treat you kindly. That's what's true. That's what happened. They acted in ways that caused you to hurt, and that hurt is real. That feeling is real. That emotion is very real. What you tell yourself about what happened and what people should or shouldn't do, that's never going to be as real as what actually happened." This is a big leap for a lot of people to make because they're taught by society, we're taught by society, by our schools, by our friends, and by our culture, that certain stories and conclusions about life have an objective reality to them. But the truth is that sometimes parents are unkind, and sometimes children are unkind. Sometimes your friends are not kind to you, and I'm sure there have been times when you've not been kind to your friends. You may have experienced some very real suffering, but when we add on top of that what we believe should or shouldn't be, that mental position literally locks the painful emotion into our systems. So even though this is a very difficult thing for people to see because it's so contrary to the way we think, it's absolutely necessary if we're really going to end suffering. I'm not saying that you should in any way repress what has happened in the past or pretend that it didn't hurt immensely. I'm not asking that people tell themselves the opposite story. "Oh, it's perfectly fine if parents treat their children unkindly." I'm simply inviting you to stay with what has been and what is now. How do you feel right now? See what it's like when you can feel everything that is there without telling yourself anything about it. Sometimes the feeling may temporarily get more vivid. It may strike even deeper as the emotion starts to purge itself from your system. As you become more and more conscious, your emotional suffering can become even greater for a short period of time. It's like you're thawing out from a mental and emotional numbness. But this thawing out is absolutely critical, because unless we purge ourselves of all the stories that contain our suffering, we won't ever feel the freedom and peace of interacting with life from the perspective of truth. Once you begin to get a feeling for the many ways our thoughts and stories keep us in suffering, you've actually started to tap into something that has a much greater significance. It's something you can use to widen your view of life. Any way that we make a construct out of life, any way that we come to conclusions in our mind about what is or what was or what will be, we are narrowing our experience of life. They are all ways in which we argue with what is. Anytime you argue with what was, what is, or what will be, you limit your ability to experience the vastness of who you are. There's no way around it. It doesn't matter what happened or how cruel someone was or how unfair something was. It may have been all of those things, and the pain may be very deep and real. But when we have a mental resistance, when we say something should or should not have happened, we're arguing with what did happen or what is happening. When we argue with life, we lose every single time, and suffering wins. So I think he illustrates with those stories. I think the stories are helpful because we can see how those people in the stories when they're attached to their ideas about how things ought to be, they're in great pain. That's the definition of suffering. We can experience pain, emotional or physical. That's like the woman who was here that one week talked about hurting herself and, out in the shed and just sat down, and she had this experience of pain without the suffering. And it was like, wow, I didn't know I could do that. Really cool. Because it's not personal at that point. Not saying that shouldn't have happened to me. That's so terrible. It's just like when a little kid gets hurt, like you see the shock on their face, right? They haven't decided yet. They haven't labeled it. They haven't said, you did that to me, right? It's just for a few moments until somebody goes, oh, and lets them know it was horrible, that they're just having a pure experience, right? Even if they're hurt, even if you can tell that there's some sort of pain and a wail is coming, right? And we are so caught up with all of our definitions and shoulds and shouldn'ts that we don't really get to have that pure experience. We pretty much jump to the conclusion right away. That's our survival system. We've learned it's really responsive. It works really well. It knows who to blame, which way to run, right? Who to curse at, who to, But we interrupt our experience, our pure experience of just what happened. Life just happened. And then what happens, right? There's getting hurt, and then when we start to tell ourselves how awful it was, it becomes this like sticky, quicksandy, mucky, like it's hard to get out of, it's hard to stop. It has this quality of like repeating itself, and it gets tired and heavy and dark. And even though we don't like it and we know we don't like it, it's hard to stop. Because we get really attached to our ideas about should and shouldn't. Okay. We talked a little bit last week about why that's so. Because unless we've discovered our true identity, we're attached to the identity of ourself as this little frail, fragile me person. Right? It's all personal. Everything hurts. Everything cuts right to the bone. Because it's about my idea of myself. That's what got injured. Somebody who cuts me off in the highway didn't actually touch me or do anything to me. But it's the idea of me, and that person was rude, right? It's all ideas in our head. We weave this story all by ourselves, right? And we sit there and we suffer and stew. I've done it. I do it, right? Especially, if it's like you get to have that experience of a near miss and like, right? This far from your insurance rates going up, right? So then the finger starts to point, right? And then when we get to where we're going, we want to tell everybody about the thing that happened to us on the highway, or, what almost happened back there. There's a person in front of me, and I could say, hello, how are you? But I'm talking about this thing that almost happened back there. Because it was an assault to my identity, my meanness. And until we discover that we can take our meanness very lightly, we can hold it very lightly. It's very flexible. We just know it's going to change constantly. What the me thinks, right or wrong, or passionate, or doesn't care about, all that, it's constantly in motion, always moving. And so we just hold it lightly. Like, I'm telling the story right now, but I know that I might not give a crap about it tomorrow. And there's a little part of me inside that knows I'm just telling a story and I'm not really all that attached to it right now. I could just stop telling it right now because who cares? That's what it's like to be in contact with your true identity. The story is unfolding. Life is unfolding. Stuff's happening around you, near you, to you. But you know it's not personal. You know that life is just unfolding. And things you experience is happening to you, people speaking to you, cutting you off, whatever, being kind to you. You know that it's the appearance of you, it's spirit masquerading as me, and we're just doing this little dance. It's all dancing. Spirit is all just dancing in these different forms. And when we know that, when we stay in contact with that, it's really difficult to take all the stuff seriously. And ego has a hard time imagining what that might be like. It can think of all kinds of reasons that that is scary and dangerous and a bad idea. So the first step might be something like considering what would happen if I didn't believe any of my thoughts. At least not 100%. We've got that 10 or 15%, maybe, I won't go 20. 10 or 15% of our thoughts that are like toolbox mind, but we're doing at work, right? Decision making that we have to use for getting stuff done. But even that, when we make decisions about what should I read to the kid or do the dishes first, make dinner or attend to the homework or whatever all those decisions are. They might seem pretty clear sometimes, but even that stuff is arbitrary. So what if we really didn't believe in, and that's where, I was stuck there for a while. I remember Audrey saying, the best place to start is really just don't believe any of your thoughts. And not really think that any of your thoughts are true. It's all just description. The mind has to use labels and concepts to describe reality. So it's limited, right? We just had that discussion right at the beginning. Labels always have limitations. So our mind uses labels to describe everything, describe life to us. So just by the nature of using that kind of way of, that's the human part. We have to get around that way. We have to all know what the stop sign means, right? But our thoughts are, by and large, conditioned. The ways that we think about life are conditioned. So if we don't buy into them, that gives us a little bit of space to see the conditioning. It creates the distance that allows us to see, or maybe even ask the question, is it true? Especially for the big ones. Those are the ones that are really important. You know how to tell the big ones, right? Positive or negative. So big emotion, something there to look at. See what assumptions might be there, and can you question them? Is it true? Okay. So that's a place to start. And I'm not telling anybody that they shouldn't believe anything that they think. I'm always offering ideas for how to end suffering, for how to get to a place that's more peaceful, more loving, more aligned with who you really are. So this is something that anyone here is free to investigate if you want to. And if you're not attracted to it, you don't like the idea of it, then forget about it. I don't care. Okay. Any questions before we take a quick break and get ready to meditate? Okay, so back in 5. Okay. There's a restroom there and there. And we'll turn phones off too. Okay.
Wow, that's big food for thought.
Yeah.
It really is.
It is.
Yeah.
The thing that really amazes me is people with chronic pain. That this kind of work is so, just the idea of maybe I don't have to resist it.
Yeah, because that adds to
Yeah.
the pressure of it.
The tension, yeah, you add more tension to what's already there, and it pretty much makes it worse.
Is
And
that what a pain therapy counselor would help somebody with?
In pain management, that is some of what they do. They definitely, I mean, that's what John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction started with. A bunch of chronic pain and illness patients to see how mindfulness would impact their coping. And the side effect was they actually experienced less pain and faster healing and better outcomes just from not resisting the pain. It's just mind-blowing.
My husband deals with these cluster headaches. Have you ever heard of
Yeah.
The cyclical
Yes.
behind the eye. And I think a lot of his pain, or a lot of it comes, it is pain, I know, I've seen it, but it's the anticipation of when is it going to happen next.
Anticipatory anxiety. It almost brings it on.
Yeah, I mean, I can just see him, like, he won't have one for a night. It'll be like this. And then he has another one, a night later, and he'll go, oh, now they're back.
Right.
Now.
Just like people with panic, same thing. Yeah.
That was an interesting thing to think about. So I was thinking about suggesting to see a pain counselor. I don't know, what do they call it?
Well, lately in my training, in the somatic experiencing training, I'm really starting to be convinced of the link between nervous system stuff and headaches. It seems pretty compelling that migraines and any kind of headaches have a relationship to nervous system regulation. So you might recommend that he see a somatic therapist. Somebody who works with the body.
Okay.
Yeah. Mary Ware would be a good person.
I just hate to see him.
Yeah, and if he's not really big into medication, then he might be willing to try something like that. Yes.
He's using oxygen
Yeah.
once the onset happens,
Yeah.
instead of taking, pain medication.
Yeah.
Use the oxygen.
Cool. If you want some more permanent relief, get the unresolved trauma out of the nervous system.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's amazing what kind of assumptions we've made about medical conditions that are turning out to not be true. Headaches is one of those that I'm just amazed that really almost every physical ailment has some kind of an underlying nervous system issue. So, and that can be worked with. We know how to work with that now. So that's really cool. Okay. So the first uh, the first task is always just to get comfortable, as comfortable as you can. Does everybody have a comfortable enough chair? And everybody I know has their own way how they like to sit, but I always want to make a recommendation, and so my recommendation is always feet on the floor, a mostly upright position without too much like of anything to rest your head on. Yeah, that's the sleeping chair. um, and usually hands on your face down on your legs, and mostly just trying to be upright enough that you can get as much air naturally. You're not straining or trying too hard to get a nice full breath. Okay? And another thing is when we're tied up in knots, we, after 24 minutes, which is what we're doing tonight, limbs can start to tingle and fall asleep, or, our blood gets cut off, and we have to fidget and move around and reposition. And so sitting like this minimizes the chance that we're going to wind up having to reposition constantly. That kind of sets us up for having to do it over and over again. And I always suggest, fidgeting happens, restlessness happens. See if you can just notice what the feeling or the experience of the restlessness is, and see if you can delay. See if you can delay just a little bit before you adjust yourself. And then when you adjust, if it's due to restlessness or something, discomfort, move slowly so that you can experience the adjustment as well. Because otherwise, if we adjust quickly, we're likely to not experience relief from that, and then we keep having to adjust. So it's just an experiment that you can practice on your own. If you feel sleepy, you can always open your eyes for a little bit, wiggle your toes, take a couple of deeper breaths to help revive yourself. Sometimes people feel a little bit disoriented if they get really relaxed, and we're going for relaxed alertness. We're not going for transcendental, zoned out. We're not going for counting breath, hanging on really tightly. We're somewhere in the middle. We want to be relaxed but alert. Okay? And your only job really during this entire meditation is to notice what's happening, to see if you can notice what's happening without interfering in your ability to just notice. Okay. Oops, that wasn't very loud. Okay, so we'll start with relaxing the body, and first just get a sense of your seat, your spot on the earth, noticing what it feels like to be occupying that space. And see if you can allow yourself to fully arrive. We've been doing lots of mind activity. And see if you could just drop into your body and allow yourself to fully inhabit your body and be here all the way. And you've chosen to be here this evening, so you may as well allow yourself to fully be here. And as you feel ready, start to turn your attention to the top of your head, just noticing whatever sensations you find there at the top of your head. And it could be anything or nothing, tingling or tension, or coolness or warmth. But all you're doing is noticing. Noticing what the top of your head feels like. then gently leave whatever you notice there and let your attention move down to notice your face. And you might especially notice the areas where we carry tension around the eyes or the mouth. See if you can unclench your jaw if it's clenched, or let your tongue down. And then just notice what that feels like to release that tension. Letting yourself experience that. And then slowly let your attention drift around to the sides of your head, noticing whatever you find there. And you might imagine letting your ears drop slightly as a way of releasing any tension in the temples. And notice what that feels like. And then as you're ready, you can leave any remaining sensations there on the sides of your head as you drift around with your attention to notice the back of your head and the back of your neck. Seeing if you can just notice what you find there, whether it's tension or relaxation or some discomfort. You might ask if that area is willing to relax if it feels too uncomfortable. And just open to see what relaxation occurs after that. And then see if you can leave whatever's there in the back of your head, the back of your neck, and notice your shoulders. Letting your attention move to your shoulders, just noticing what's there. Maybe you can let them drop further if you don't realize that you're holding them up. There's tension there. Noticing what it feels like to release that tension. No forcing, just allowing. And then let your attention travel down over the shoulders, the length of your arms, stopping to notice your upper arm and your elbows and your forearms, wrists, hands, letting your attention travel all the way out to your fingertips, noticing what is the experience of your arms and hands right now. And you don't have to label anything. You can just notice whether there's an experience of tiredness, or tingling, or achiness, or pulsing, or whatever you find. And you're just seeing what it feels like. Seeing if you can stay with it for a moment. Your only job is to notice. And then slowly, gently, you're going to pull your attention away from your hands and arms and start to notice your core. Noticing your body from your throat all the way down to your hips. And pausing to notice what the throat feels like. Notice what the chest feels like. Notice what the belly feels like. All the way down to your hips, where you're sitting in the chair. And you might notice some tension there. Sometimes that's our armor that we carry during the day. You could see if possible to allow your throat to loosen and to let the area around your heart feel more open and to let your belly soften and to just feel the solidness of your hips and your seat in the chair supporting you. And then just notice what it's like to have the front of your body relax. Nobody's watching here. We don't have to suck in our guts. We can just be soft and relaxed. And then as you feel ready, you can start to notice your legs from where you sit in the chair, scanning down the top of your legs, front and back, and pausing to notice your knees. Letting your attention travel over your shins and calves, down to your ankles, heels, noticing the length of your foot all the way to the tips of your toes. Noticing what your legs feel like right now. Seeing what they're like now as opposed to last time, or usually, or what you think they ought to feel like. And then when you're done noticing what your legs feel like, gently Slowly pull your attention up into the area where you notice breathing happening. Not trying to change the breath in any way, but just noticing that it's happening. That there's breathing in and there's breathing out. And it's happening without you even trying. You might just see if you notice where your breath gets your attention most strongly. Sensation of the air coming in or going out, or movement in your chest, or belly, or maybe the sound. And notice that there is space at the end of the out-breath. And see if you can be curious about where that space is at the end of the in-breath. Almost imperceptible, but you know it has to be there in order for the breath to change direction. And you're just noticing. You could notice whether your breath feels deep or shallow. Fast or slow. And as you feel ready, see if you could allow other things into the space of your awareness. Your breath is happening, but you may notice other things happening in the present moment as well. There may be smells, sounds, taste in your mouth, the feeling of a chair, or of your feet on the ground or in your shoes. Sounds in the room or coming from outside. And your only job is to notice. You're just noticing that these things are happening. Without pushing any of them away or hanging on too tightly to any of them. You're just allowing your attention to move freely as it wishes. And you're just following it. Oh, what do I notice next? And notice how attention moves. It just moves naturally. And you you're just seeing if you can stay in the space of noticing what's here now. Perhaps even thoughts or feelings are here now. And you can just notice that they exist. It isn't necessary to get caught up in what the thoughts are thinking. And if you get pulled away, as soon as you notice that you've been thinking, you can just come back. Come back to noticing what's actually happening in the present moment. Your only job is to notice. No matter what your experience is right now, it's just fine, exactly as it is. Even if the experience is of restlessness or boredom or irritation or uncertainty or discomfort. Just do your best to notice that that is happening, whatever that thing is. And see if you can notice what that's like. And if you like, you can introduce this question into your meditation space to help stay in the present moment. You just ask, what happens if I allow everything to be as it is? What if I wasn't in opposition to anything in this moment? What would the experience of that be? What's that like? What happens if I let go of the one who's trying to get it right? Controller. What if I even let go of the one who's trying to meditate well right now? The one who has ideas about what this is supposed to be like, what meditation is about. And you're just noticing, what is the response when you introduce that question? What happens if I allow everything to be as it is? You're just noticing what that's like. Imagining what that would be like helps you have a truer experience than forcing yourself to let go. And you can just keep coming back to the question if you like. Am I really and truly allowing everything to be as it is? And you can ask it as often as you like. There's almost no end to the letting go. There's another deeper level of letting go every time you So just take one more minute or so, savor the silence, the spaciousness. Noticing what it's like, noticing that all you had to do was nothing to get to this place. Setting an intention to remember that it's always there, this part of you. It's actually what you are, and it's always there. And as you feel ready, start to send some energy into your arms and legs, and some movement in your fingers and toes, taking as much time as you need to end your meditation. So nice to see you all this evening. Namaste. Yes. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just got the Falling into Grace on my
Yeah.
borrowing my mom's Kindle. I was at the beach, and I was like, oh, I want to read